Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video will be reviewing the player supplement Legends of Frozenfar, an Icewind Dale player's companion, designed by Taron with Benjamin Huffman, Ross Leiser, and AJ Pickett for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. So the question is this Icewind Dale player's companion useful for playing through Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden, since that is obviously the campaign it's most modeled to be used with? And the answer is kind of. I actually think it would be more appropriate for Storm King's Thunder. It goes really hard with the runic system, which, from what I remember, playing Storm King's Thunder was a big part of that campaign, including actually found magic runes that you could use either as magic objects or enchant them onto other items. There was a whole system there. This attempts to make some runic subclasses and then has a fairly complex system of runes that goes with it that I think actually is a little too complex for subclasses. The main part of this, like, 70-page player supplement is it provides a new subclass, one for each class, including Artificer, so we've got 13. New subclass appropriate to Icewind Dale. So from that region, you know, either cold powers or have to do with, you know, giants or something like that. Which is a cool idea, and there's a lot of, you know, supplements that thematically tie their subclasses to a particular area, which I think works pretty well. The other part is there are two races, Verbeerg and Firbolg, although Firbolg is from, I believe, Volo's Guide to Monsters already, so this just kind of says, hey, if you want to make your Firbolg from Icewind Dale, here's some little tweaks you can make. It does give you a way of making Verbeeg, which are the kind of weird half-ogre, half-giant sized creatures around Icewind Dale into a player race. I would just use Goliaths. Goliaths make way more sense as a player race to me, but it's there if you want it. The entire part 2, I don't know why this document uses parts and chapters. That feels very oddly redundant to me. I mean, the actual layout and formatting and artwork and stuff is gorgeous, but the organization between using parts and chapters is a little too much. We've got part 1, chapter 2, part 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, part 3, chapter 5, and part 4 is just all the appendices. I don't know why we needed parts there on top of the chapters. But chapters 3 and 4 are all about that rune stuff, to the part where you have to look back. When you look at your class, like the Artificer, we'll get to this in a second, it says, you know, you have all these runic abilities, and you have to literally flip all the way from page 5 to page 30 to figure out what those abilities are, and then you have to read like 5 pages of information. That is way too much for a subclass, and they do that multiple times. The actual runic system is interesting, but I think it's a little too much. And then chapter 5 is all items and equipment that are thematically, of course, tied to Icewind Dale, and this chapter is actually pretty useful, especially if you're into foraging. If you've got a ranger or a druid that's really into like plants and herbs and stuff, that's a cool chapter. So I wanted to give my thoughts overarching because I've got kind of mixed thoughts about this supplement. So let's go into the actual subclasses, which, you know, for subclasses, I've reviewed so many now. You really have to do something that is not already existing, which is getting harder and harder because you know, now we've got, between Xanathar's and Tasha's, a lot of subclass options for all the classes, and a lot of them are really cool ideas, to the point where, unfortunately, this supplement gets kind of screwed by Tasha's, because Tasha's added a rune fighter subclass for the fighter that uses runes. And I believe this, I don't know when this was designed, but it was published a few months before Tasha's came out. I believe this was originally published in September of 2020. Tasha's came out in November, as I recall. So I'm not going to fault this for doing the rune thing. Obviously, it's a cool idea in general, but Tasha's has the rune fighter specifically is a great example of how 5e takes what could be a very complicated system and strips it down into a very simple system. And this one really feels like it takes a step back and makes it a very complicated system again, which is not something that I am into. So in this supplement, the Artificer, the Druid, and the Fighter all are runic subclasses. It literally copy and pastes the entire 3rd level runic invocation ability and how it works and everything. I believe the only thing that changes is maybe your DC is a different stat depending on what class you are. Now, the abilities you get as you level up, depending on whenever you gain your subclass abilities, those do change. Like the Druid has the ability to expend wild shapes into turning into kind of a giant stat block, which is neat. The Fighter can use a like runic blast and gains like basically an Eldritch Blast force attack, which is really powerful looking. But they all use the same runic thing, so it's weird. Like, it's on the one hand, that's shitty that you use the same feature for 3 of your 13 subclasses, but the designer then designers then create a whole complicated system for working with these runes that is interesting, but one that I think isn't in the spirit of 5e, in that it's too complicated and it's impossible for me to not directly compare it to the Rune Fighter from Tasha's as an example of what I would have rather seen. Now, would I like to have seen the Rune Fighter have more options to choose from, like the Battlemaster maneuvers, and maybe not literally just like Fire Giant Rune, Storm Giant Rune, but actual like runes as in Storm King's Thunder uses runes? They're like actual like, one-word things, which this supplement does. Yes, I think that would have been cool. But this one goes into a whole system of you have to, certain runes. So you have to pick from a list of literally over 20 different runes. We're talking like it's invocation sized. But then you can inscribe those runes on different objects. You can awaken them, which adds a ongoing ability, like an effect that's on. And then you can invoke them as part of an action once per rest to do an additional thing. But then all these runes have different prerequisites, like you have to put it on a certain thing, like a pair of boots or a weapon, and then you have to have this other rune activated first. Like there's this whole big complicated system where this should have been its own class. If you're going to come up with an entire system that requires pages of explanation, you should just come up with a rune class, which is not a bad idea. Like, I mean, coming up with a new class is a tricky thing because 5e already covers most of what we want, and subclasses are the way easier thing to do. But I realize I'm talking about this while staring at the Artificer. I'm talking about a whole other chapter, but it's difficult because so many of these classes use that rune system, and if I'm not a fan of the rune system, that's a big part of this, of how this supplement works. The ones that don't use runes are okay. Honestly, it's just not my favorite group of classes. I'm gonna be honest. Barbarian is probably one of the better ones. You basically get a mount. It kind of copies a lot of the ranger abilities in terms of how the mount scales with your stats, and the fact that if they die, you can like use a long rest and I think expend a use of your rage to bring them back. Basically uses a lot of the newer rules, I think, from maybe Unearthed Arcana at that point, because Tasha's wouldn't have come out yet, for dealing with the ranger companion. So you get a barbarian beast companion, and it's kind of like a woolly mammoth or a dinosaur or something big that you can ride on and mount. And there's some cool, synergies there, obviously. It does get tricky, of course, if you have an entire class that's built around a mount and you're going into like dungeons all the time and you've got this big beast. That's a tricky thing to wrap your head around, but it's a neat idea, and it's something that at least doesn't seem to step on the toes of any other barbarians. It's a little bit of the ranger thing, but at least here it's designed to be a giant beast that you are mounted on. So I think it's generally thumbs up. The Bard of Hospitality, you can summon your own tavern, which is functionally the exact same as Leoman's tiny hut, except it feeds everybody, which, I mean, I don't really care about rations and things, so it's just a Leoman's tiny hut, essentially. And I think you can give out like temporary hit points for your bardic inspiration or something. Just not that. I mean, it's kind of a fun idea, but the mechanics just aren't that interesting to me. The Cleric Divine Domain. Hey, do you want those crappy ranger abilities from the original player's handbook that nobody uses and enjoys, and is the reason why ranger is often poo-pooed everywhere, to where they had to basically soft fix ranger in Tasha's? Then the Cleric Travel Domain is for you, because it uses a bunch of the shitty ranger abilities. Why? I don't know why. No, I don't want that. The Druid, same thing as Artificer, it uses the runic stuff, but at least you can transform into a giant, which is kind of nifty. Fighter, again, uses the rune stuff, but this one has more powerful abilities, I think, in that you can like invoke a rune and I think use an additional attack. You can change your damage of your pulse attack, which is that force blast. It seems a little powerful to give a fighter essentially an Eldritch Blast on top of all this like rune stuff, but that's fine. I mean, I'm not a... Again, I have a big problem with the whole rune system. We'll get to that. Paladin Oath of Sacrifice is fantastic. That's one of the good ones. Thumbs up on the Oath of Sacrifice. It doubles down on one of the core abilities of the Paladin, which is Lay on Hands. And it makes sense thematically because you're sacrificing your own life force. In other words, you can deal damage to yourself to channel your Divine Smite, or you can, I believe, reduce your own hit points to add to your Lay on Hands at a better ratio. It's like a 2-to-1 or something. That all makes sense to me, and it's all about, you know, protecting others and martyring yourself. Fantastic. Like, thematically it works, the abilities work. Thumbs up to the Oath of Sacrifice. The Pugilist, so this is based on Benjamin Huffman's Pugilist class, which at this point everybody, I think, knows about on the DM's Guild, which was a replacement for the Monk. I'm not familiar with the Pugilist. Maybe I'm crazy because I really like the Monk in 5e. Maybe I'm the weird one for still enjoying the classic martial arts type fighter, and I think there's a lot of cool subclasses there with the Monk. I like the way key points work. I don't know. I have no problem with the Monk, so when I saw Pugilist, I had to look up, like, wait a minute, what is this? And then realize, I mean, it's very bold to, like, assume other people have already know what the Pugilist is, to where there is no Monk. There is only Pugilist. So that's... I can't comment on it because I'm not familiar with the Pugilist. I don't know if it is a departure from the class or if it is just a retheming of the class to make it more of a, hey, we can use this kind of... somebody who just attacks with fisticuffs but is not a rethemed fighter. They still have their, like, whatever, I think of Moxie points was something I was seeing. So I'm not familiar with the Pugilist, so I can't really comment on that. But I thought it was weird that we got the Pugilist instead of the Monk, instead of in addition to. Ranger Trailblazer is actually an oddly supportive ranger. You can put down a mark, not a hunter's mark, but a guiding mark, and then other people can get bonuses to attack and damage, which is fine, I guess. It's not terribly exciting. The Rogue is clearly based on Indiana Jones. He's got extra abilities towards magic items specifically, which is kind of interesting. You can suppress cursed items as one of his abilities, and what seems really powerful to me is you can employ your sneak attack just if you're using a magic item. Then that instantly lets you use your sneak attack, which feels... I guess that's fine. It feels a little powerful to me because most people be using, you know, magic items by a certain level and pretty much never be looking back from there. But I don't know how much Indiana Jones specifically factors into the Icewind Dale region so much, but that's fine, I guess. I mean, yeah, you'd be hunting treasures, but you could also use that for most regions of the Forgotten Realms. The Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard are all fine. I think they do a pretty good job. I think out of the three, the Warlock is probably my favorite. The Sorcerer and Warlock both use cold spells. Specifically, the Sorcerer is probably more Elsa than anything else. You can do a lot of flurries and blizzards and create a little snowman and all that. And then the Warlock has some nifty, like you can freeze the ground and then unfreeze it. You gain Ray of Frost and Chill Touch as cantrips, and then you can use all your Eldritch Blast augments with those. I probably would just say, why don't you just take Eldritch Blast and make it cold? That would probably be the easier thing to mechanically do. Immunity to cold damage at one point. You gain the ability to, like, turn other people kind of into ice forms, which slows them down. You get some cool abilities, and they're all very thematically tied to ice, which I like. The Wizard one actually goes in a different direction in that it is demon themed, specifically with Find Familiar. You can summon a demonic familiar, which I don't know why we didn't use this imp stat block. Instead, we use something called the Diabolic Servant. And then at 10th level, when you summon him, you can use different consumable things worth money to basically buff your familiar. I guess there's demonic stuff happening in Icewind Dale, so maybe that one just seems less thematically tied for me than the other two. But I don't have, mechanics-wise, they all seemed fine. So overall, I mean, kind of, you know, middle of the road in terms of all the supplements, some thumbs up, thumbs down. The biggest problem is 3 of them use the rune system, and I thought, well, let's dive into the rune system. I'm not really going to cover the races much because it's just the Furbolg just has a kind of a mention about here's how to make the variant for Icewind Dale, and the Verbeeg is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but I don't think a big desire there to make a Verbeeg playable character just when Goliaths already exist, and I'm pretty sure they existed before Rime of the Frost Maiden as well. But I mean, it's fine. You become large. You can wield 2-handed weapons in one hand. You do extra damage with javelins and spears, proficiency in animal handling, survival. I mean, none of it seems weird or anything, so that's fine. All right, so the way the runes work. So if you have one of those subclasses, you have to skip ahead 20 some pages to get to the rune chapter to actually read about how it works. If you can't explain your subclass in the actual subclass section, then it's too goddamn complicated of a subclass. You need to have designed a new rune class, a runic warrior or fighter or whatever class. And in fact, if it's a class, then you can make somebody who knows runes, and then different subclasses could be you're more of a spellcaster who uses runes, or you're more of a fighter who uses runes, and that kind of thing. It could be interesting. This is too much for a subclass, though. You know certain runes, depending on your level, which there's a whole chart about runes known and then runes awakened. You can inscribe them on something, which takes some time. Then you can awaken them, which is how you activate their ongoing ability. And again, they have prerequisites to where you can activate them based on, some of them have certain ones you have to activate first, and other ones have a number. Like, look at this chart right here. So you have to activate, for example, for the blood rune, you have to activate live and one additional rune. So it has to be the third rune that you awaken I mean, it gets really weirdly complicated and meticulous about how all this stuff works. Whereas you look at the rune fighter, am I saying that right? Is it rune fighter? We look rune knight. Sorry, the rune knight. If you look at, I'm sure it wasn't rune fighter. The rune knight, it's just you pick your runes, and then you can activate your rune, and your rune gives you, first of all, when you pick it, it gives you some kind of skill bonus, and then whenever you activate it, it gives you a thing you can do when you activate it, and that's pretty much it, and it works really well. Once per, short rest. This one, you can awaken them. You've got all these prerequisites to what you can awaken in what order, and then you can invoke them as an action, but only once per long rest. And a lot of them have like material components. I mean, the cool thing is there's a lot of options here, which I think is pretty neat. The designer really went pretty hard into giving you so many options about some of them deal damage, some of them are buffs, some of them, one of the cooler ones is it just provides like a fountain of healing almost, and then as an action you can just turn that water in the cup into like a minor healing potion. There's just a lot of really cool ideas. There's over 20 of them in here, but it's just too complicated to how they all work. I don't like that there's a separate awakening effect that's always on, a separate invocation effect, the fact that you can learn certain ones, you can awaken certain ones, there's a whole awakening prerequisite. It is just way too complicated, to the point where if somebody brought this class to the table, and then every single time that they're doing this, they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to awaken this rune, and I'm going to have this effect ongoing, and I'm going to invoke this effect this turn. Like, my eyes are just rolling to the back of my head. You're taking too damn long, and you've got too much crap going on. It's just not a fan. It's too much. It's too much for a subclass, because this is also, keep in mind, in addition to all the other stuff you've got as whatever class you are, and two of them were spellcasting classes. So you already were a druid with wild shapes and spells, or you were an artificer with all the crazy artificer stuff plus spells. Like, at least the fighter, you just had the runes and you could inscribe that on, which is a reason why it's the fighter in Tasha's, because you've got you don't have any other stuff going on. You just have these special rune powers, and even then they don't require all these extra things. So I mean, I don't want to harp on this too much, but it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way with the way the whole rune system works, and I feel bad, because I know it seems like there was a lot of effort put into this and a lot of work, and I think, if you like that level of complication, then I think there's a lot to like here, but it honestly kind of repelled me and turned me off of using it, because it was just too complicated, and it was impossible for me not to compare it to one that I thought did this better, which was the Rune Knight in Tasha's. Now, if you wanted to kind of combine the Rune Knight with maybe some of the runes in here, I think that would probably be the best version of that subclass, just for fighter. But I mean, as it is, it's a really neat idea, but I think it's just way too much complication and mechanics for what amounts to a couple different subclasses. Thankfully, it's not all that's in this supplement. We actually get a whole nother chapter on just a bunch of different supplies and items and vehicles, things that you would find in Icewind Dale, which is pretty nice if you are meticulous about keeping track of that stuff. I am not at all. So a lot of this doesn't really matter to me, but it does feel like if you do care about that stuff, you do care about, tracking rations and want to get really thematic when it comes to your tools and your mounts and your gear, then you could find a lot of cool stuff to use there. What did interest me, even though I would not necessarily use this, is the incredible flora and fungi system here, where it has a bunch of berries and herbs and trees, literally over 20 of them, that people can identify and forage. I would only introduce this if a player was interested in doing this. If there was a druid or ranger character and they were super into, I don't know, plants and the wildlife of the area, or I wanted to make that part of their ongoing quest arc or something, was to find all these different ingredients or something, then that would be really cool. And there's a lot of work that's put into these, a lot of thematic, the description and stuff. Some of them do have mechanical benefits. Like they'll give you advantage against saving throws against disease or extreme cold. One of them gives you a bonus to religion if you weave it into like a crown on your head, which is kind of fun. So it's a lot of information there, and there's a whole table of random foraging trees for different areas. It's a neat idea, and I think a cool addition. Not something I would automatically add into a game unless I had a player that was straight up interested in that or built their character around like plant life in Icewind Dale. The appendices, this is not as interesting as I was hoping because it mainly just copy and paste information from the Dungeon Master's Guide, which granted, a lot of people do not read the Dungeon Master's Guide or have not read it in a while. So some of that information is very nice to have as a reminder, but that's what basically this first appendix is just a bunch of copy and pasted information from the Dungeon Master's Guide. And yes, it is paginated. It's not like they're trying to plagiarize or anything, but that's what the information is. The gazetteer and the notable locations and everything is not as useful in a post Rime of the Frost Maiden world. I don't know when this was published in relation to Rime of the Frost Maiden, but a lot of the information is pretty much the exact same that you would see there. So all the town information, the notable locations, the speaker, the population, all that stuff, you will find better information in Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden. Now, maybe you're running your own campaign in Icewind Dale that doesn't have to do with Rime of the Frost Maiden, in which case this information is very good if you hadn't bought that book. I think it'd be very weird if you were doing that and hadn't bought Rime of the Frost Maiden, but that this is an alternative. The gazetteer is a little more useful. It's got information on maybe some tribes and things that the book might not necessarily go into in that level of detail, mainly the Reged tribes, which is kind of cool. Nice information there. Otherwise, not quite as useful information as I was hoping. And then the timeline, if you're really into Forgotten Realms lore, then there's a whole timeline there, which I am... it's kind of interesting, but not terribly useful. So that is my overarching thoughts on this supplement. Let's go over my quick pros and cons for Legends of Frozenfar. Pro, I did put the subclasses ultimately as a pro, but they're also kind of as a con. We'll see that in a second. But I did write the 13 new subclasses thematically linked to Icewind Dale. This is definitely a quantity over quality, unfortunately, because I think about half of them were thumbs up and half were thumbs down. But there's a lot of subclasses here, and they, for the most part, felt like they were all themed correctly. I don't know about the wizard demon one or the what was the... Oh, the rogue, like Indiana Jones one, were like a little bit, okay, that could be for anything, but for the most part, Icewind Dale theme comes through. Pro, the dozens of regional herbs and plants to identify and forage, basically a part of Chapter 5 I thought was actually really strong, that the designers went wholehearted in, which is dozens of plants, and if I had a character that was super into that, that would be a really cool feature to add for them. Pro, I also put the overall presentation of this document, which I didn't comment on as I was flipping through here, but it is actually very lovely put together, professional design, awesome artwork, by the way, with, I believe, a Remoraz versus a Behir, which is like some Monster Hunter bullshit, and I fucking love it. Throw an Anjanath in there, and I'm yours. Not that it has anything to do with what's happening in the supplement, but still, really cool cover. Really nice full-page artwork. Just the whole presentation is absolutely gorgeous. Love it. So, cons... I basically summarized my cons into 2 different points. One of them was that 3 subclasses use the exact same rune system introduced later in the supplement. It really feels like just a copy-paste job. Granted, they have different effects as you level up, but still, the fact that 3 of them use the same rune system, and 2 of them are spellcasting classes with a lot of stuff going on, and then you added this very complicated rune system on top of that, which is my other negative bullet point, which is that the runic invocations are too complex for a subclass feature. If you wanted to go this hard into the runes, you needed to design an entirely new class around these runes, and then you can make subclasses out of that. Final verdict. The new runic subclasses and features of Legends of Frozenfar fit Storm King's Thunder better than Rime of the Frost Maiden, though many subclasses are a fun reflection of the Frozen North. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel, and you can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Wizard, Princess, Christopher, Star Lovely, Thomas, Ian, Captain Mike, Adam, Goblin Works, and Aiden. And gold patrons: RPG, Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Numa, Markel, State, Vicente, Gilberto, Dead Lizard, Lounge, Sam, Ross, Slippy, Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy, 619, Sclenny, Nick, Farty, McButterpants, Blood Angel, Vernos, The Fireworks Factory, Baboon, Sean, A.K. Cert2B, Nathan, and Fast Like a Tortoise. Thank you all very much for your support.